With a spirit of responsibility and teamwork, the School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project continues its humanitarian role since its establishment in 1967, keeping its contribution to serving the Yemeni human in various circumstances and phases that Yemen has gone through. Given its humanitarian role, its ability to implement development, relief, and humanitarian projects, its wide all over Yemen, and its position of qualified expertise and staff, School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project has become one of the most important and largest partners of the United Nations World Food Programme. The emergency operation is one of the most important humanitarian and relief projects in Yemen. It targets more than 500,000 Yemeni households per month, from the affected groups, internally displaced people, the most vulnerable people with special needs, and those with chronic diseases. The School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project provides the food aids in partnership with the World Food Programme in an ongoing basis to beneficiaries in 1,800 final distribution points in 65 districts of 12 Yemeni governorates. The emergency operation is conducted through a group of phases that reflects the magnificence of the partnership between the World Food Programme and the School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project. The targeting process for districts and areas starts according to the World Food Programme criteria and according to the results of the World Food Programme food security surveys. Then, the approved allocations for each district are determined by World Food Programme and shared with School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project. School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project sends the approved allocations, which are determined by World Food Programme, to the governorates and districts, so the targeted households can be selected and identified at the level of each district and region by the local authorities. Regarding those affected and the branches of Supreme Council for the Management and Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and World Food Programme regarding the internal displaced people. World Food Programme purchases the food aids from inside of Yemen or abroad and transport it to the Yemeni ports. These aids are subject to inspection by the Yemeni Standardization, Meteorology and Quality Control Organization to ensure their safety, quality, and safe use. After that, the World Food Programme is granted an official permit to move and transport them to World Food Programme central warehouses in Al-Hudaydah, Sana'a, Sa'da, Aden, and Ib governorate. School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project and its branches and districts, in coordination with the Supreme Council for the Management and Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and local authorities, maps the targeted households in final distribution points according to their proximity to their areas of residence. In cooperation between the School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project and World Food Programme, the distribution plans are set up, including the numbers of households in each final distribution point, along with the food items and quantities available and determined with the World Food Programme. The distribution plan is developed before each distribution cycle in level of each governorate, districts, and final distribution points. Considering this, World Food Programme develops the plans of dispatching the approved quantities and then transports the food commodities from the World Food Programme warehouses to the final distribution point stores through transportation companies contracted with World Food Programme for this purpose. School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project sends official letters to the local authorities informing them of the start of the food aid transport process. They, in turn, inform the local authorities, School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project branches in the districts, and school principal to receive and store the food commodities from the transport companies.
ولا تختموش على الويبل أو توقعوا له استلام إلا بعد استلام الكمية كاملة وسليمة.
The school feeding and humanitarian relief projects branches in the governorates and districts also follow up the dispatching process and takes all actions to facilitate the delivery of food aid to the final distribution points. The school feeding and humanitarian relief project then forms central distribution committees to supervise the distribution process at the level of each district. The heads and members of the central committees are selected from the school feeding and humanitarian relief project and ministry staff according to experience and competence. In addition to the supervision of representatives of the local authorities and Supreme Council for the Management and Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, they are then trained and qualified before starting each distribution process. A supervisor is assigned to each governorate, assisted by school feeding and humanitarian relief project branch manager in the governorate, who are responsible for implementing the project in the governorate in all phases and steps of project implementation. In addition to its role in distributing food aids and its contributions to combating hunger, school feeding and humanitarian relief project has provided many direct and indirect job opportunities in all distribution areas for men and women. The school feeding and humanitarian relief project has formed community committees for involved into the operations and activities of the food aid for the targeted groups of different genders and ages, while ensuring that women's committees are given the opportunity to participate in organizing the beneficiaries into queues in accordance with the customs and traditions of the conservative Yemeni society. School feeding and humanitarian relief project issues records containing lists of beneficiaries' names every 3 months, along with a copy of the beneficiaries' names that is posted in the final distribution points and facilitates the process of beneficiaries searching for their names and numbers in the distribution lists. The school feeding and humanitarian relief project also appoints its own forms for the distribution process, including project introductory billboards, posters, and receipt cards before each distribution process. Food baskets are prepared and divided according to the approved quantity for each beneficiary, according to the approved quantities in the distribution plan. Heads and members of the central committees assigned to supervise the distribution process in the districts that receives all documents, forms, and stationery related to the work. They are transported to the district and final distribution point by vehicles belonging to the transportation companies contracted with school feeding and humanitarian relief project for this purpose. Once the heads and members of the central committees arrive to the district, they coordinate with the local authorities and school feeding and humanitarian relief projects branches for launching the distribution. Then, they inventory the commodities that are available in the final distribution point stores according to the prepared and designated inventory form, aiming to match the commodities according to the distribution plan and waybills to ensure the safety of food commodities. The heads and members of the central committees in each final distribution point post a copy of the BNF lists and post identification posters containing the instructions of the beneficiaries and the food commodities that are distributed and the ration of each food item. These committees also launch the distribution process with the local teams in final distribution points, document the distribution process, and submit daily and final reports on the completion and progress of the distribution process, difficulties, issue, proposed recommendations, and variables, if any. The local team in each final distribution points consists of the school principal, head of the local community, storekeeper, and a member of the local authority who distribute food aid to the beneficiaries according to the school feeding and humanitarian relief project mechanism. The food aid is distributed to beneficiary hand in hand using identification cards. The food is disbursed to the beneficiary or to one of his blood relatives, based on ensuring that all required documents are brought, the most important of which is the identification card of the beneficiary and the recipient. All beneficiary data is matched and he is fingerprinted in the beneficiary list and given a receipt card containing his name and the type of commodities he will receive. After that, the beneficiary is guided to the matching through the third copy of the beneficiary lists. After the committee member signs the matching, the beneficiary is guided to the store to receive his food ration. Then daily reports are received from the governorate and collected in one format and sent to the World Food Programme. The World Food Programme undertakes follow-up and monitoring during and after each distribution through its staff or TPM companies that contracted with the World Food Programme for this purpose. The final reports and working documents for each distribution are received by the revision team of Monitoring and Evaluation Unit, which checks and reviews them and submits a comprehensive report on the progress of the distribution process. It also reports any variables or modifications that have been submitted from the field to the data unit. The data unit updates all data and enters and modifies any variables raised from the field after each distribution process through the entry team and reflected in the distribution plans for the next cycle. After that, the team in the head office issues the final records after reviewing and printing them in the form of distribution records prepared through internal systems in data unit and submitting them to the preparatory committee for distribution to the governorate supervisors and fieldwork teams to start work. This is how the work is conducted every cycle. During and after each distribution process, complaints are received from the field through the School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Projects communication team, which also communicates with the random samples of beneficiaries in various governorates and districts to ensure that they have received their assistance and submits a daily report to the School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project leadership.
الو ما لقيتش اسمك؟ طيب ايش اسمك انت؟ محمد علي صالح. طيب في مركز ينزل اسمك؟ مركز الفلاح. المديرية؟ طيب هتم يا استاذ ان شاء الله التحقق من قاعدة البيانات ونشوف وين نزل اسمك ونرجع لك خبر.
Over the days, School Feeding and Humanitarian Relief Project has become a support in times of hardship, a healer of harm in times of defeat, a giver of hope in times of despair, and a maker of optimism in times of weakness, bearing the characteristics of humanity for all Yemenis without exception.